Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. My guest today is retired Admiral Michael Mullen. He was the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff between 2007 and 2011 under President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. He joins us live from Washington. Thank you for being with us today.
Good to be with you, Mark.
Mr. Mullen, I want to begin with the strange relationship between President Trump and the military. We've seen in recent days a controversy about him accusing previous presidents of not really taking care of the families of dead soldiers. Then there is this controversy about how he handled a call to the family, to the widow, actually, of a recently killed U.S. soldier. We've seen his chief of staff, General John Kelly, being thrown into the ring. How appropriate is that?
Well, it's a very, very unfortunate set of circumstances. For those that we've lost here, particularly these four, we should keep them in our thoughts and prayers and do all we can to support them through this unimaginable loss. That's most important. I think that this issue has spun very much out of control. It's been a very difficult one. Certainly, General Kelly spoke from his heart, having experienced this kind of tragic loss in his own family. So nobody understands it better. What has failed to happen, I think, with almost everybody involved, that it's moved away from the focus on the family, which is where it needs to be, to the politicization of the issue. And I also think it speaks to the political environment in which we find ourselves in the United States, where literally nothing is beyond the reach of politics in a very, very partisan way. So again, it's unfortunate. I hope actually we can put it behind us and remember these families, remember the sacrifice of these extraordinary soldiers, and they are some of many who represent the best of who we are in the United States of America.
Do you blame President Trump for using this issue politically?
I think actually my belief is that President Trump really was attempting to be sincere. Some of the discussion which has occurred in the United States is the right words in these circumstances are always very difficult to find, because there's nothing anybody can say that can give relief to these grieving families. Certainly, I was concerned, as many, when at the end of, when he was asked about these soldiers' loss, that he turned to his predecessors and seemed to criticize them for not being in touch with families. And I mean, I was personally there under both President Obama as well as President Bush, and both were always moved by these losses, always did everything they could to show compassion and support and send that message that these were very special people and we would never forget their sacrifice.
I want to get to something you recently declared. I'm quoting you. You said, "I'm increasingly concerned about the dependence of the American people on Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, and the man we just mentioned already, John Kelly, the Chief of Staff," essentially saying that relying so much on the generals was not what the United States was about. Can you explain to our viewers what you have in mind?
Well, I think certainly over the last 9 months, there's been a lot of chaotic events in the White House and in the Trump administration. And many people that I talk to in America are very reassured by the presence of these three generals, two of whom are retired. General McMaster is still on active duty. And I've heard the term many times, providing the bulwark of stability in the White House. And they clearly are. I know all three of them really well. They're exceptional individuals, very capable and competent. That said, I'm one that believes that relying on generals active duty and retired to lead our government is not the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We are a country who elects civilian leaders to our senior positions, very much tied to civilian control of the military per se, and to have this many established individuals in these senior positions in the government is something I hope is only temporary, because it is not proven throughout our history that there have been very many occasions where that was the case.
Well, the idea is probably to bring coherence, order into the White House. Many observers would say, actually, this is not happening. And so this measure, which you seem to say is not in the tradition, doesn't seem to be working as well.
Well, I think that I think there's certainly a judgment to be made with respect to that. I think most people would argue that since General Kelly took over as the Chief of Staff, that there is more order and discipline. But that has been focused, for the most part, I think, on the staff itself. And certainly the challenge of predicting where the president will go next and what he will say is one that General Kelly, as the Chief of Staff, currently faces, and I think he will as long as he's in the job.
I want to get to the issue and this raid in Niger, which resulted in the loss of those 4 soldiers, is only an illustration of that. You have American soldiers all across the globe. This was authorized back in 2001 by Congress, and many are wondering, is there any control? Is there any oversight? And should there be more? Because basically, wars are being fought in the shadows without clear civilian leadership looking over.
Well, I certainly don't think there's any intent to not provide the kind of information to the oversight bodies, if you will, which in the United States
but they don't do their job.
Congress.
That's what it seems.
Well, I mean, that actually, certainly this particular tragedy will illuminate exactly, what kind of oversight was available, was being put on this kind of mission. That said, we've had consecutive presidents, President Bush, President Obama, now President Trump, are very much focused on eliminating and doing as much as we can against these terrorist threats, which are global. They're not just in Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya. There are global threats, and certainly we've seen for years many terrorists that are in Africa, whether it's West Africa or East Africa. And I think each administration has used forces to focus on that, and that certainly was the case in the most recent incident in Niger.
I want to get quickly to 2 of the main crises. First of all, North Korea. The CIA chief, Mike Pompeo, said North Korea was months away from being able to strike the United States with a nuclear weapon. What do you make of the administration's handling of the North Korean threat?
Well, I think the director of the CIA knows more than just about anybody else about the specific issues and the timeline. So I certainly believe what he says. And one of the things that's clearly happened in North Korea is that Kim Jong-un has accelerated his timeline beyond previous estimates of just about all analysts. So we need to be concerned that that capability is arriving sooner rather than later. I'm increasingly concerned that the diplomatic channels, which I think are an absolute priority here, are closing down. Unless we see some movement out of Beijing, I worry more and more that the probability goes up that we could end up in a war in with North Korea. Almost whatever action, whatever military action is taken, the worry is that in reaction to that Kim Jong-un could react very, very badly. So I hope, I'm sure there's a full court press to try to resolve this diplomatically. I think it's got to go through Beijing. It's not just Beijing's responsibility. The United States certainly has some as well.
Are you worried about what you're
hopeful.
hearing from the president? on this issue?
Well, I think I have worried about the rhetoric. I think there's not a lot of room between locked and loaded and actually pulling the trigger. There's high risk in this strategy, and sometimes high risk can pay off, and other times there's a significant downside. So I'm more worried about North Korea than I have been in 15 or 20 years.
Well, very last question. Iran, Donald Trump has indicated that he thinks the nuclear deal is a very bad deal. Now it's up to Congress to decide whether to pull out of the deal. Would this be a good thing, or do you think this would be a major mistake?
I was one who supported the deal. It wasn't 100-0. It was much closer to 50-50 for me. That said, we made the deal. We've got allies who made the deal. And by all indications, Iran is complying with the terms of the deal. That it didn't focus on terrorism, that it didn't focus on missile tests was well known at the time. I think we need to press Iran very specifically on those issues, but hold to the deal. I do think that Congress actually put this 3-month review requirement on the president, then President Obama, and I think we need to do away with that. And I'm hopeful that Congress will not reimpose sanctions and that effectively the deal will remain in place.
Retired Admiral Michael Mullen, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for being with us on the France 24 interview from Washington. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned here on France 24 for more news. Thank you. Thank you very much.